Rabbi Louis Jacob, Zichrono Livracha, used to ask, why does a Jew answer a question with a question? And then stroking his beard, as he used to do, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, he would say, why not? Last Shabbat, student Rabbi Matt Turchin, who leads Rimon, currently about to enter its second year on Zoom, tapped into the curiosity of children and young people by asking the students to post their questions on the chat. After some initial hesitation, their questions came thick and fast, and they were quite challenging. At one point, I had to reach for my biblical dictionary to discover the Hebrew root of matzah. Another young person wanted to know what language the word afikomen was. How clever to realize that it probably was not a Hebrew word. And then there was the question of the orange on the Seder plate. According to an article I read recently, children ask an average of 40,000 questions between the ages of 2 and 5. That is phenomenal. Adults, on the other hand, ask less than 10 questions a day, which means, said the writer of the article, that something happens between childhood and adulthood. Something goes missing, not necessarily in our quest for answers. Children don't always want to know what the answer is, but they need to ask the question, and perhaps the question needs to be reflected back to them. Why do you think there's an orange on the Seder plate? Can you guess what the language, the word afikomen, comes from? I wonder if we become scared of betraying our ignorance as we grow older. Do we lose something of that innate curiosity about the world? I'm not sure, but somewhere between childhood and adulthood, we lose several hundred questions a day. Questions need space, and with the internet and social media, it does often feel as though we're bombarded with information, some valuable and some utterly useless. At the heart of the Seder, we find the 4 questions. Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. What makes this night different from all other nights? The youngest present asks the question, which seems very appropriate, and throughout the night, some of the questions may be answered, but not all. Rabbi Igor and I very much want to create some space this morning for your questions, if you have any. I can't see anything at the minute on the chat. Oh, can we eat rice during Passover? I've seen one. We'll try to answer them and try to allow them to open up further discussion at your Sedarim this evening. And if we can't answer them, we'll go away and discover the answers, if they exist, or we'll reflect them back to you and see if anybody else has got an answer. While you gather your questions together and put them in the chat, either on YouTube or in the Zoom, bearing in mind that we're ahead of those of you on YouTube by about 30 seconds, I'll just start off with some of those questions asked by the children and young people of Rimon. So the first question that was asked was, what does matzah mean? Well, in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, it's translated as unleavened bread or unleavened cakes. Unleavened bread, as we heard in our Torah portion this morning, isn't just used at Pesach, but on other occasions, part of the sacrificial cult. Its root, however, is the Hebrew word matzah, which means to drain out or to draw out. The verbal form of it is used only once in Isaiah, Jerusalem is compared to a nursing mother whose inhabitants will suck from her breast. It's used more frequently in rabbinic literature, where it means to suck, to drain, to wring, or to press. The word matzah helps us to understand the basic problem of baking matzah. Matzah, paradoxically, is made from one of the 5 grains, the grains that are prohibited on Pesach: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. And yet matzah has to be made from one of the grains, most commonly wheat flour. Matzah is not allowed to ferment, and so the dough must be protected from heat and moisture before mixing. That's if you're going to make your own matzah. It's quite difficult. It has to be prepared very quickly and baked at a very high temperature. The matzot are needed from the time the matzot are needed to the time they go into the oven can be no more than 18 minutes. So matzot are flat breads. The moisture has been matzatzed, pressed out of it. Do you want to answer a question about the orange on the Seder plates?
Yeah.
All right.
I think this was one of the questions which Ramon students asked, as well as one of the person on Zoom now. A story which many people tell. Well, first of all, I know that there is slight side noise at this microphone, and I apologize for it. There's nothing we can do now, but we will try to fix it later. Coming back to the question of orange, many people will tell you this story, which I will tell you in advance. This is a myth. This is not the correct one. But many people tell the story when once an Orthodox rabbi said that a woman can become a rabbi only when an orange will be on the Seder plate. And since now we have women rabbis, so here we go. The orange is on our Seder plate. However, this story is not a true story. The real story comes to a scholar, the Torah and Talmud scholar Susanna Haschel, the daughter of famous Rabbi Abraham Joshua Haschel. Once she participated in the Seder, in the Pesach Seder, with an LGBT plus community. And they put a piece of bread on the Seder plate, which is of course an outrageous according to the Jewish law. And piece of bread does not belong on the Seder plate. And the reason why they put the piece of bread is exactly for that reason, because many LGBT plus communities used to feel that they belong to the Jewish community in the same way as the piece of bread does, which means that they didn't feel belong to the Jewish community. But the idea of having something symbolizing the unity of Jewish people was very much appreciated by Susanna, but she was a traditional Jew, and she is a traditional Jew still, and she could not think of having a bread in the house during the Seder. So she came up with this idea of having an orange, something which is whole, which is round, which symbolizes the unity of the Jewish people, but which consists, which has segments, which has little parts, which are different, but which belong to one unity. And the orange today is a symbol of unity of the Jewish people. And we can think of LGBT plus or of other communities which don't necessarily feel that they have space within the Jewish community. And this is a symbol of inclusivity. This is a symbol of our way to make people feel welcome.
I see, Rabbi Igor, there's another question directed to you particularly about whether there are any particular Seder traditions observed by Russian Jews at the Seder night.
Well, there is only one I can think of. First of all, the Seder plays a very important role for Russian-speaking Jews. Not only in Russia, but all Jews who speak or have some Russian-speaking background. During the time of the Soviet Union, the people were not allowed to practice their religion, and people often were not allowed to leave the Soviet Union. And therefore, the idea of Pesach, with its message of letting people go, is very, very much, was very poignant for Russian-speaking Jews and for Soviet Jews. And therefore, many Russian-speaking Jews would choose Pesach until today over any other festival. So those Jews who would only come to synagogue once a year, they would only come for Seder Pesach. And there's no special symbols for it apart from the idea that the Pesach is the central festival for Russian-speaking Jews.
In fact, there are lots of customs that belong to different communities all over the world, whether in Syria or Morocco. I just remember reading very recently, every single community, wherever they were in the world, had infused the Seder with their own customs and their own traditions, depending on where they were. So this is an interesting question. What should we do with Elijah's and Miriam's cups after a Seder? How long should we wait? And I assume that means how long until you pour the wine in Elijah's cup and the water in Miriam's cup away. It does feel often a little bit odd pouring away the wine from Elijah's cup. But you might want to keep it for a second or even a third night Seder, or even a seventh night Seder. We've held a Seder here on the seventh night, very different in feel with particular themes. But I don't know about the virtues really of holding on to a cup of water and a cup of wine. That fifth cup, Elijah's cup, isn't yet to be drunk. So however tempting it is to drink the Elijah's cup, it's not something that we can do until, of course, Elijah comes to herald the Messianic age. And if I could just pick up one of the next questions from Hannah, is there a specific special mitzvah to donate or support charities or social causes during Pesach? Definitely yes. And one charity I can think of, well, I can think of lots of charities, but maybe I'll just name two. One is the Israeli charity Leket, which was the beneficiary of one of our High Holy Day appeals a couple of years ago, which provides food for homeless and for poor people in Israel, and a charity which we support here, which is a food bank, Sufra, which is based in Brent, and which one of our members has been picking up boxes of food from Sufra and delivering it to families and to individuals around Brent and Wembley and so forth. Right, what's happened to my... Do you want to pick up one of the other questions, Igor?
I'm not sure I can fully answer the question, but I really like the question from Zoom about the answers which people give to different types of questions, or in the story of 4 children. So the question sounds this way. So the answer to the wicked son is clearly explained. Because of what the Eternal One did to me when I came out of Egypt, that is me, not him. Why is the same answer given to the son who does not know how to ask? So why is the same answer given to 2 types of questions? First of all, it comes from these types of answers and questions are coming from the Torah, because in 4 occasions in the Torah, it's explained that there is a tradition, there is a commandment to tell your child, well, Torah speaks about son, but we certainly extend it to all children, to tell your child about the Exodus. And there are different ways, different phrases, different formulations are used to articulate this commandment. So for me, this is names or nicknames which we give to these sons, to these children, are very questionable, because for me, the so-called wicked son asks the best kind of question. The wicked son asks what it is. It's an honest and genuine question. If a person doesn't know, the person asks without anything else. For example, a person who, or a type of a person who is called Chacham, wise in the story of 4 children, asks a question which to me seems more like a challenge to a service leader. Tell me the ordinances. Tell me the reason why you celebrate it. Tell me. It doesn't seem very wise. It seems challenging. And I think that for me, this play of words, who do we speak about when we tell the story of Egypt? Do we use the third person pronoun? So this is what happens to those Jews, or this is what happens to us. I think it's resolved in the text which goes shortly after the story of 4 sons. It's the text which says, "Bechol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim." In every generation, a person must see themselves as if he or she came out of Egypt themselves. And this is something which I think makes this conflict between the third person and the first person resolved, because we can use whatever we want as long as we associate ourselves with this story. It's not only about the phrases, it's about the way we feel.
Perhaps a last question from Tony. Where does the tradition of leaning come from? Where does it originate? It's probably Greek. The extraordinary thing about the Seder is that it's a sort of bringing together of different disciplines and traditions. The biblical origin, you shall tell your child on that day, telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. But also that has been somehow, that becomes part of what was a Greek philosophical symposium, that perhaps the Seder has its origins in this sort of symposium where people sat around a table, had an hors d'oeuvre, dipped their hors d'oeuvre into something, just as we dip our parsley into the salt water or our maror into the charoset, Lent as a symbol of being free on their left hands, ate with their right hands at a Greek symposium. So the leaning very likely comes from that Greek tradition of free men. I'll stress the men there, probably, because it was the men who maybe sat round and discussed. And that's really one of the main origins of the Passover Seder, this philosophical discussion that we will also enter into tonight. There is a line in the Reform Haggadah that comes just before the 4 questions that says, the question is a great religious act. It helps us to live great religious truth. At Pesach, we ask 4 questions that draw attention to the symbols on the Seder plate. But as we've seen, the ritual opens up the possibility of many other questions. What is the meaning of my life? Who am I? Is there a greater purpose in life? How do we come to terms with death? and live with loss? What are my beliefs about the deepest part of myself that some people call God? And how can I live my life in a way that can bring goodness into the world? May our Sedarim this evening help us to explore those questions and many more, so that we can reclaim our curiosity and our desire to learn more about life, about our Judaism, about each other. In reaching out to ask about the lives of others, perhaps we'll learn something about ourselves, about that which is sacred, about our spirit, about enslavement and freedom, about our pride and humility, about life and death. May you find meaning and joy in your Sedarim, and at this season of our freedom, apprehend and experience something of the vision of the prophet Malachi, a vision of divine tenderness towards humanity, when the Son of Healing will rise with righteousness on its wings, and a time when the hearts of the parents will turn to their children, and the hearts of the children to their parents. Kein Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.